this is how you get the big numbers on a Nightblade. It's a fairly complicated playstyle, but you can actually do some of the highest single target damage in the game right now on a Nightblade, which is super cool. Hey everyone, it's Night Horror here, and guys, I've got an amazing build for you today. I'm so excited about where the Nightblade is currently. You know, for so long, what we really want, so many of us, is we want the thing that is optimal to also be the most fun, or at least really fun. And I really think that finally the Nightblade is finally there. Okay, so there's a couple of things with this build. So first off, if you choose to be a vampire, which I don't know about you guys, I love the Dark Brotherhood, I love the Thieves Guild skill line, and I love being a vampire. And I have been a Nightblade not since the beginning of ESO, but since the beginning of Daggerfall. So I played a Nightblade all the way back then. My point in telling you that anecdote is that I've been wanting to play a vampire Nightblade since Daggerfall, and have been. So today, this build, you don't have to be a vampire with it, but it actually does add something material to the build, which I think is really cool. So with that, we'll just go ahead and jump in and start talking about it a little bit. So first up, let's talk about gear. Now, we're going to recommend Advancing Yokita and Null Arca, because it's the Glass Assassin, right? Now, many of you have heard Null Arca did get a nerf last patch. It's around 500 to 2.5k DPS loss, and it kind of depends. It was double proccing sometimes, so it was better on AoE fights than it is now, and so there is a little bit of a DPS loss. Part of the issue here is that we were making this build, you know, right straddling the patch coming out, so we didn't know what was going to happen with Null Arca, and it did get nerfed. But that's the base setup that I'm going to recommend for you, and then we're going to pair that with the Maelstrom Greatsword, and with the Celine's monster set, which is really nice because it's easy to get monster set. Now, if you want a more optimal setup for single target damage, Advancing Yokita with Arms of Reliquant is going to be the way to go for maximum single target damage. I really like Advancing Yokita, even though it's a fairly difficult to keep up set, because you really got to make sure you're hitting those light attacks. And Null Arca, I like a little bit better than Reliquant because the stacks build on you. And so if you're in solo content, or if an ad dies or something, you know, you're not gonna waste those stacks like you do with Reliquant. Reliquant is really that single target set in most situations, so you will get more damage out of it. But like any kind of in-game player, just realize you're gonna have to swap up your sets quite a bit. Now, if you're looking for something you can just set and forget, my one setup, I did a video a while back talking about, you know, there's one setup that any DPS can use, and you can use it for all content in the game, and no one's going to get mad or kick you out of group. That's still true for this build. You can absolutely use Onsol's Torment, which drops from Sanity's Edge, and Zogvin's Warband, which drops from Frostvolt. So those two sets will still work very well with this build. You'll lose a little bit of DPS, but it's not going to be horrible, and those will work anywhere and everywhere. So another option, if you want an easier to get set, is you could do Order's Wrath, which is crafted, and pair that with Zogvin's Warband, as we just talked about. That's from Frostvolt, so it's a dungeon. Guys, I just want to say, a lot of people are really opposed to going to trials. They just don't want to go into a trial. I just want to tell you that a normal trial is easier than a normal dungeon. Unless you're going to like harder Cloud Rests or something, like a normal trial is easier than a normal dungeon, because there's 11 other people to carry you instead of 3 other people to carry you. So even if you don't know at all what's going on, sure, it's kind of chaotic, you're kind of running around, you don't know where everybody's going or what have you, but that's the hardest part about it, is staying with the group, okay? It's really not that difficult. I understand, though, if you're just completely opposed to it, like I said, go with Order's Wrath, Zogvin's Warband, you'll be just fine. Now, if you're in an AoE fight, something you want to use Azure Blight on, you could pair that with World of Depths, would probably be the way to go there. And if you want a trash setup, again, still Azure Blight and Soulzan's Torment are still going to be the best. Azure Blight dropping from Lair of Marsalok, and Soulzan's Torment dropping from Rockgrove. And again, you don't need to run those on veteran, just run them on normal, grab the gear, and you'll be good to go. But several setups there for you. If you have a question about, hey, will this setup work, just drop it in the comments below. The main thing with this build is, like, there's no, like, Null Arca is really the only really compelling set, because it really likes crit, and on a Nightblade we have high crit, and pairing it with something like Advancing Yokita, which gives you more critical, works really well. But other than that, most other sets that are good generally are still going to be good on this Nightblade. There's nothing else you need to really lean into the Nightblade playstyle, unless it's for fun or what have you. I'm going to tell you the real secret to what in-game players, how we make an unkillable build, okay? What we do is we take our normal full DPS setup that we use in a trial, and then what we do is we swap out our mythic, whatever it happens to be, and put on Ring of the Pale Order. And that's it. That's literally it. Because if you are doing, and you know, if you're an in-game player and you're really good at doing damage, you will do enough damage to heal yourself to full every second. And so the only thing that you really need to worry about is getting one shot, okay? Now, that will not get you through everything, or won't get you easily through everything. So then you start to add in a few other, abilities that will reduce your damage taken from those one shots. So fewer things will one shot you. Another thing, and we'll talk about this more in the DPS section, is having damage over time abilities will keep you getting constant healing ticks on you. And so making sure to dot up a lot of enemies, especially if you get stunned or something, will allow you to, even while you're stunned, to continue to get heals because your dots are ticking. Okay. So that is the trick to making any build unkillable. And then after that, it's just adding more resistances and a few other things to make you a little bit more survivable, a few buffs and what have you. Another thing here, guys, is if you're going into an AoE fight, one of the first things you're going to want to do is drop Celine's. And if you have it, add in Velothi Urmage Amulet, because it will buff all of our damage done. Celine's is a single target set. Just like most of this stuff, works really good single target, but if you're in an AoE fight, you want to drop that and drop Celine's, put one piece of Slime Crawl on for the extra critical, and then add in the Velothi Urmage Amulet. All right, for CP, for our blue CP, we're going to Wrathful Strikes, Deadly Aim, Master at Arms, and Exploiter. Now, as always, if you're in different kind of content, you might want to swap up this stuff. This is just what's best in group content and typically on the dummy. If you are running around solo, probably swapping out Wrathful Strikes for something like Master at Arms for the increased critical chance is probably going to be the way to go, because you're not going to be at critical damage cap, and that'll give you a little bit more damage. Everything else you can pretty much leave the same. Exploiter now, it used to be that you needed to take this off, but now with scribing skills, you'll see there's always a way to proc off balance on pretty much any build, so you can pretty much leave Exploiter on your bar, in general. Deadly Aim and Master at Arms, you might want to swap these out depending on what your AoE setup is, so that you get some damage over time and AoE damage instead of just single target and direct damage attacks, okay? So again, that's just going to depend on you, how sweaty you want to get. If you leave these, guys, they're like a 2 or 3% damage increase overall. So, each one of them is about that much. If you don't have any of them, if none of them are doing anything for you, which won't be the case, but realistically, you're looking at 3 to 6% damage reduction or damage lost if you're not changing these up for AoE fights or something like that. So just keep that in mind. For slottable red CP, this is really a choose your own adventure. I've listed 4 here that I really like. Fortified for the extra armor, Expert Evasion for the free roll dodge, although we have really good sustain, so, Expert Evasion might be the first one to go on this build for me, personally. Celerity gives you a little bit of speed in combat, just nice to have. And then Slippery allows you to break free. Slippery is really nice in solo content because you get CC'd an annoying amount of times in the various arenas and stuff like that, at least in my experience. This is a stamina build, so we're going to put all of our points, our tribute points, into stamina, and we're going to run the Thief Mundus because that gives us the most damage. For race, I personally really like Dark Elves, and the reason I like Dark Elves, besides the look and the flavor of them, is because Dark Elves can run Magicka or Stamina builds, and they don't lose any damage. They're both equally good. I mean, it's like a small margin of error between the difference between that and like the optimal race. So that's why I like Dark Elves. Listen, guys, if you really like a High Elf, for example, High Elf is probably going to be one of the worst choices for this build because this is all Stamina and High Elves are all Magicka. And so a Magicka Nightblade would be better on a High Elf, but you're looking at about a 5% DPS loss at the maximum, okay? So that means instead of parsing, 100K, you're parsing 95K. You decide for yourself if that's a big enough deal for you or not. Orc is also probably the second best option here. And then if you're solo, Khajiit is going to jump to the top of the list because they give you extra critical damage. And you're almost never at cap whenever you're running around solo. So Khajiit is almost always the best race for almost any solo build. I think pretty much any solo build, really. Maybe not a Brildan. I don't know. But it's pretty high up there. And for food, if you need health, you're going to go with Dubious Cameron Throne. If you don't need max health, then I would go with Lava Foot Stomp, extra stamina, and the stamina recoveries. For potions, so we're going to find that if we're in a group that has a Dragon Knight running igneous weapons, then we can actually run trash pots because we get all the buffs we would normally get from weapon damage potions, partially from our build, and then the other one will be from the Dragon Knight. So we don't even have to worry about that. That's kind of cool. But if we don't have a Dragon Knight, we're running on solo or something like that, using weapon damage potions is the way to go. If instead you are looking for more survivability, whether you're running around solo or in a group content and you've got that Dragon Knight, you can actually use armor potions. Now, there's 2 kinds of armor potions that you can use. One of them will provide you with armor of both types, and then it'll give you health back, no stamina. If you are in a situation where you're needing stamina recovery, there is one that will give max health and stamina back, as well as recovery of those two things, which you might need that stamina recovery. It's fairly cheap to use these potions, so they're both options for you, or you can use trash potions. The main thing is that on a Nightblade, it's drinking a potion is part of our rotation, because every time we drink a potion, we gain 20 ultimate, and we use our ultimate, which is very cheap, only costing 70 ultimate, all the time, okay? So that's a significant portion, well over 20% of our total ultimate gen each time we use our ultimate is coming from our potion in a single target situation. So we do need to be drinking potions. At least drink, trash potions, or tri-stat potions are also an option, whatever you'd like, but you need to be drinking something typically roughly on cooldown. We'll talk about exactly when to drink it more and as we go through the skills and talk about our rotation more. And as far as these potions, if you want a potion of armor that will give you both resistances and health, it is Mountain Flower, Mudcrab Chitin, and Bug Loss. If you want one that restores health, stamina, and gives you physical resistance, not magic resistance, then you're looking at Beetle Scuttle, Mountain Flower, and Columbine. Okay, hopefully that's helpful for you guys. You can always look this stuff up too at uesp.com.net, UESP. Just Google it, you'll find it, and they've got a ton of useful information on that site. I highly recommend it. You don't have to worry about the pop-up ads that you do with some other sites, and there's a lot of great information for you there as far as buffs and how to make potions and all kinds. Anything you need is probably there, if it's not on my website, nighthorrorgaming.com. Maybe one day we'll be able to add some of this important stuff to nighthorrorgaming.com, but for right now, it's mostly my build guides and some general advice. We're working on it, guys. We'll get some more up there soon. Hey, guys, this is a great time to say, hey, if you want to support the channel, yes, like and subscribe on the video, but the main thing is share the video. If you think this is good content, it would be helpful for other people, get the word out, share it with somebody else, let them know it's good. And if you really like it, consider becoming a channel member. It starts for only $1 a month, and that is the best way to support the channel. I also have a Ko-fi if you'd prefer that. But that kind of stuff really allows me to, the direct support is what really allows most creators to continue doing what they're doing. Yes, we get a little bit from ad revenue, but usually 50% of total what we make will come, if we're going to be successful, is going to come from you guys directly donating. So appreciate your support if you're able. All right, now let's go ahead and move on to our weapon enchants. And guys, for those who don't know, your enchantments and your traits on your pieces for any build, whether it's a healer, a DPS, or a tank, are almost always the same, no matter what set you're wearing. It just matters where that piece of armor is, right? So on our weapons, in this particular build, on our front bar, we're going to use double charged daggers. We're going to put a fire enchantment on one, a poison enchantment on the other. On our back bar, we're going to use the infused Maelstrom Greatsword, and then we're going to use a weapon damage enchant on that. For the body, all divines, all maximum stamina enchants, all medium armor as well. And then for our jewelry, we're going with Bloodthirsty, and weapon or spell damage, it really doesn't matter. Just make sure it's one of those two. The increased recoveries of 10 per doesn't really register, to be totally honest with you. It's too little. All right, that out of the way, let's talk about the meat of what we want to talk about, which is the skills. And as we talk about this, we'll talk about how this works into our rotation. And then at the end, I'll kind of give a rehash of what our rotation should generally look like. So first skill up here is going to be Shadowy Disguise. It gives us a 10% increased damage for 10 seconds. So that's when you go into invisible and then come out. But in most group settings, you can't really be invisible. All bosses and everything else detects you immediately. But it does technically proc this for some fraction of a second. So it will give you 10 seconds of that 10% increase in damage. And that's going to be really helpful. A Nightblade, as we do our rotation, it's really all about these windows where we do a ton of damage. Okay, so it's really bursty as far as our damage. So this is going to help us out with that. The other thing really useful in solo content, but it procs the Shadow Barrier passive, which what that does is gives us major resolve for 12 seconds upon casting a shadow skill. So this skill only lasts for 10 seconds. If we, generally speaking, keep it up and don't let it drop for more than a couple of seconds, we're always going to have major resolve kind of for free. That's going to reduce our damage taken by about 9% and is significant. This is one of the first things whenever you're running around solo and you're trying to reduce your damage taken, you want some source of major resolve, and Nightblades just kind of get it by having this just standard in their rotation. So it's a really nice thing that works good for solo and for overland. Now, our second skill up here is going to be our execute ability. So Nightblades are one where your rotation changes once you hit execute. So Killer's Blade is going to become our chosen spammable when we hit about 35% health. Okay, so once a mob gets under 35%, you can start using Killer's Blade as your spammable instead of our next skill. We'll just move on. Surprise Attack. Surprise Attack is just a good, single target damage ability. It also guarantees apply the Sundered status effect. So Sundered will, when it procs, it does a little bit of extra damage, but it also applies Minor Breach for only for 4 seconds. But it's our spammable, so we're going to be proccing this all the time. Minor Breach in group content, typically your tank is, providing this, but in solo content, you can provide it for yourself, which is pretty helpful. And we'll see there's one other skill that will really help us get, pretty high on as far as our penetration on a lot of targets. Now, if we're in a more, AoE focused fight, maybe there's several mobs that we have to worry about. Maybe there's, whatever it happens to be, and we want to get a little bit more cleave. Instead of running surprise attack, we can run Shattering Knife. Shattering Knife, hopefully a lot of people know about this. It's a scribing skill. It's the one for our dual wield. And our choice for this, you want to choose the multi-target, because that's the main reason we're swapping this out. We want it to be able to hit multiple targets. And then for our second option there, if no one's running it, run physical damage. This increases the physical damage taken by the target for everybody in our group, as including ourselves, by 8%. It's significant and will just help out our build in general. If somebody else is already running that buff, then you don't need to run it, and instead you want to probably run Class Mastery. Class Mastery, when the target is over 50% health, doesn't really do anything for you. When the target is under 50% health, it increases our critical damage by 10%, or critical strike chance rather, by 10%. That's pretty significant on, on a Nightblade and on this build. You do get some diminishing returns as your crit gets really high, but I don't really think there's any other compelling option here. Now, the third option here is if you are running around solo and you want some cleave. So you got two options that I would say, two main options. First of all, if you're running Ring of the Pale Order, you're running around solo or what have you, you're already getting a ton of heals. So as I mentioned earlier, you really only need to worry about those one shots. So instead, what you can choose here is a shield. And every time you cast your main spammable, it will provide you with a shield. Okay, this will prevent you from getting, one tapped by those, various mobs and what have you. Typically shouldn't be a problem, but it's still nice to have. Now, if you're not running Ring of the Pale Order, maybe you don't have it dug up yet, or you're a newer player, run the healing version of this, and it will absolutely give you a ton of healing. Works really well. Works really nice. If you find you're getting plenty of healing from other sources, you could also stick with the shield. 6 one way, half a dozen the other. They both work really well. The shield just kind of helps increase your effective max health. All right. Then for our third option here for our affix, we're going to go with Off Balance. And there are other options here. I don't think any of them are really compelling. We get those buffs from other places, or we don't need them, or what have you. So I think Off Balance is the way to go. This allows you in trash pools to immediately proc that Off Balance. It allows us in solo content to be able to use the Exploiter for those big damage windows. And it's just kind of nice to have all the way around. I will also note, if you're on a fully AoE, setup, you actually would want like a trash build for this, and there's plenty of places you might want to do that. I have both made Nightblade trash build setups, as well as shown you how to make your own trash setup for any build using, I think, a Nightblade as an example. So you can go check out those videos, guys. It's just, I would have to, you have to change pretty much everything if you want to be fully optimized for AoE setups. I might do a video like that on the future. If you want that, let me know down in the comments below. But for right now, it's a little bit outside of the scope of this video. Okay, so for our third skill here, and again, this is one of those major, this is the Nightblade ability, right? One of the major ones that really sets our playstyle. We're going to use Merciless Resolve. What this does is when you light attack, it builds up a stack, and it doesn't matter if you're on front bar or back bar. That increases your weapon and spell damage by 60 per stack, and then at 5 stacks, you get a spectral. You can cast Spectral Bow. This is also often referred to as a bow proc. You'll hear me say that quite often. This is an ability that whenever you get those 5 stacks and you get your bow proc, you can do just an insane amount of damage. And if you're in melee range, you heal for 50% of the damage caused. Now, if you're in group content, this is going to give you a full health bar guaranteed. If you're in solo content, it'll give you close to it. I mean, it normally tops me off. I'm trying to think, if you were really low health, maybe it wouldn't. It kind of just depends. I think it typically does enough to pretty much give you a full health bar. It's going to depend how much health you have and what have you. But this is a great ability if you're in solo content or even in group content and you know there's about to be a bunch of damage that goes out. For example, you're in Cloud Rest, right? And you know Baneful's about to go out. Hold this for a couple of extra casts. It goes off, you hit that bow proc, and you're instantly going to heal for a ton of health. So this can be really helpful to help keep yourself alive. If you're in solo content, you're on a boss fight, and you're not worried about maximum damage, you're worried about staying alive, this is something you can leave procced fairly often, and then just use it whenever you feel comfortable, feel safe to do that extra damage, or after you've taken a bunch of damage and you want that huge heal. Okay, so just keep this in mind, but it's an integral part of our playstyle. Our fifth skill here is going to be Beast Trap. Now, typically with this build, we're going with our single target setup, and we're not going to be running the Velothi Mage amulet, which gives you that minor force, which increases your critical damage by 10%. Now, if you're running Zogvin's Warband will also give you that increased 10% that bonus, that minor force, which will increase your critical damage by 10%. So this could be a situation where you don't actually have to run this, and in those situations you would typically replace this with some other skill. Lotus Fan is a great one to put in here, but some other AoE ability you could put in here if you don't need Beast Trap. Just by being on our bar, though, it is a fighter skilled skill. If we have the passives, it's going to give us a little bit increased weapon and spell damage, and also does good single target damage and provides this buff. Just keep in mind that it takes a second and a half to arm, so typically, a global cooldown is a second, so typically you want to recast this 2 seconds early so that you have 100% uptime in your rotation. So whenever you see this getting close to that 2-second mark, go ahead and recast it, and that'll make sure that you have 100% uptime on that buff, as well as the dot being good. All right, so just keep that in mind. We'll talk more about when to cast this a little bit later, but generally speaking, Barb Trap is like one of our really high priority skills because it does give us that buff. Now, our last skill on this bar is going to be our ultimate, and that's Incapacitating Strikes, or aka Incap. Incap gives us 20% increased damage done to the target that we cast it on for 8 seconds. Now, if we have a little bit more ultimate at 120, it'll actually give us I think 12 seconds of this extra increased damage. It's a nice to have, but it's not efficient to do. So normally we want to cast this at that 70, ultimate mark if we can. It's more like, hey, you were killing some trash, or you had a little bit extra ultimate. It didn't make sense to cast it then, and so now you've got a little bit extra, and it's kind of a bigger window. It's kind of a nice to have, doesn't make or break anything. The idea here, though, that really with all the skills we've covered on our front bar, really sets up the Nightblade playstyle. Okay, so what typically we want to do is, yes, we put up all of our dots. We generally want to keep them up, but then we have these windows very often of where we can cast Incapacitating strikes. And what we want to do, if all of our dots are pretty much up, then we want to cast our Incapacitating Strikes, and then we want to cast our Merciless Resolve, our bow proc, on during that window. And since it's 8 seconds and we only need 5 light attacks to proc our bow, we should be able to cast it twice within that window of time. Now, ideally, we've also used our Shadowy Disguise beforehand to increase our damage done by 10%, and so we can get a really big window of time. Whenever you cast your Incapacitating Strikes, typically speaking, the only skills you want to be casting after that are our direct damage abilities that are doing instant damage. So our Surprise Attack, or unless we're in Execute, then we use our Killer's Blade as our spammable, and then we cast our bow proc when it comes up, okay? If we can keep up our dots during this window, make sure we've got Shadowy Disguise already procced, and then hit our Incap, that's when you get those big damage windows, and that's what really gets you to those high numbers on a Nightblade. If you can time all of that with off balance, then you're really going to be cooking, okay? That's how you get the 130k, 126k numbers like Njola got. And if you don't do that, then you're at that 116 mark like I am on my Parses, okay? So that's really the big difference there. Depending on where you're at on your Nightblade journey, don't worry about that off balance window unless you're over 100k DPS already. It's just not worth it. Work on doing your rotation. Another thing of note here on your bow procs. So it's nice to have that bow, that bow proc whenever you use Incap. Absolutely. But if you have to re-up more than like 2 skills before you're hitting that Incap, before you're using that bow proc, what I would personally recommend, my rule of thumb is 2 skills. I just go ahead and cast it, re-up those skills, and then Incap when I can. And typically speaking, that'll be better for you, and you'll still be able to get 2 casts of your Spectral Bow within that 8-second window on the Incapacitating Strikes, as long as you're hitting all of your light attacks. All right, it's very important to hit light attacks on a Nightblade, even if you're running Velothi Mage Amulet. All right, for our back bar, let's go ahead and move back there. We've got, first up, Stampede. Stampede does two major things. This is a high priority skill, okay? One, it keeps our Maelstrom Greatsword effect procced so that our direct damage, like our spammables and our Spectral Bow and our incapacitating strikes, are all doing extra damage. So we want that. And the other thing it's doing is there's one skill on every weapon skill line that will keep your back bar enchantment procced even when you're on your front bar. And for the two-handed skill line, that's going to be Stampede. So we always want to keep this down, and that'll make sure that our back bar and weapon weapon enchant is always procced, increasing our weapon and spell damage. Sorry, that was a mouthful. All right, moving on from there, we have Carve. Carve is an interesting skill. So whenever the first time you cast this, it lasts for 12 seconds. The second time you cast it, it goes up, as long as the duration hasn't ticked all the way down, it goes up to 22-second duration. And then the third time, it goes to a 32-second duration. So this skill is really good for longer fights, and it's also really good as long as you don't let it drop, okay? Because if you imagine, if you let it drop, you go back to the 10 or the 12-second mark, okay, versus 32 seconds. That means you're having to cast this extra times that you could be casting your spammables on. And on a Nightblade, it's all about those spammables, that direct damage, whether it's our execute, our spamble, or our bow proc. You know, those are the skills we really want to be casting. So we want to make sure that if Carve, like for example, if we're about to cast Incap, but we see Carve has a couple of seconds left, it's going to run out before we do that. I would personally recommend casting it early. Just go ahead and clip it. That's still going to be better than it dropping down to a 10-second duration. So go ahead and, this is one of the few skills, you know, along with our Barb Trap and our Stampede, that we want to make sure that are not going to really run out in the middle of our Incap, you know, window of damage there, unless it's only going to be, you know, on most of the other skills, unless it's only going to be like a second or two. If your Barb Trap or if your back bar, your Stampede goes down for a second or two at the end of it, that's not the worst thing in the world. It's not great, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Carve, though, you really want to cast early just so that it has the full duration. Just keep that in mind. Now, if you're in a full AoE fight and the enemies are more spread out, so Carve puts on a sticky dot. It applies to that target, and doesn't matter if they move, but it only has so much of a range. It's kind of a cleave in front of you. If you're someplace where you need, you know, the targets are more spread out, for example, if you're running the Infinite Archive, right? All the trash in there, they're so spread out. I would instead run something like Caltrops. And I would also note that Caltrops, so normally you run anti-cavalry Caltrops for the maximum damage. However, if you need Major Breach, especially Major Breach in an AoE, so if you're solo, running Endless Archive, something like that, then you actually remorph this to the other morph. Or if you're kind of doing solo content. So the other day I was running Sunspire, and I used Razor Caltrops on Navintas going into the portal because someone needed Major Breach. So I use Razor Caltrops to provide that for my group. And it's just the other morph of the skill. It does a little bit less damage, but it more than makes up for it by applying that Major Breach. And it's really nice that it is an AoE. So keep that in mind. A couple of options there. Our third skill here is going to be Debilitate. Debilitate just does good damage. It's Magicka costing, Magicka damage. We always want a couple of those on any build, whether it's Stamina or Magicka. You always want a couple of skills that cost the opposite resource. Otherwise, it's just sitting there full, that resource bar, and it's not doing anything good for you. Our fourth skill here is going to be our Dark Shade. Dark Shade has been buffed so that it does a little bit more AoE damage now, which is nice. It also applies Minor Maim, which reduces enemies' damage done by 5%. That's just kind of a nice to have. In most group content, you won't need it. Somebody else will be providing it, but it's a nice thing for you to provide, and certainly nice whenever you're running around solo. And then on our fifth skill here, so we have a couple of options. Now, if you decided to go, so typically speaking, I would just say run Siphoning Attacks. Siphoning Attacks, whenever you do damage, it gives you recoveries, magic and stamina, and heals you for about, I want to say 1.5k per second, okay? Just a nice passive heal. Honestly, it makes it where a lot of running around solo, overland, not really doing anything super difficult. I don't even need to run Ring of the Pale Order or anything else. It heals you for enough, as long as there's some target you can damage. Now, you might be in a situation that you're running from point A to point B. Maybe you're in an arena solo, and it's in between rounds, or you're in between ad packs or something like that. You can actually cast this ability. It does cost 4,000 health, but it'll give you back a decent amount of Magicka and stamina. Now, obviously, you don't want to kill yourself doing that, but again, if you're running around with Ring of the Pale Order on, you can probably do enough damage damage that you're not going to notice that health loss, and it'll give you back those resources. And if you're in between trash pools and you're in a group content, the healer's probably going to be topping you off anyways, so it's a nice way of getting back resources in between pools. Typically, you don't want to be casting this inside of a fight. If that is happening to you a lot, you probably want to do something else to help your recoveries get a little bit higher. Just keep that in mind. Now, if we don't need the recoveries and we're not really worried about the passive healing because maybe we're running Ring of the Pale Order or something, we could, and we're a vampire, I should add in that, we can instead run Simmering Frenzy. And actually, you can run either morph of this, but what this Simmering Frenzy does is you toggle it on, so you hit it and it turns on, and it slowly builds up to 5 stacks. Each stack provides you with 80 weapon and spell damage. If you instead choose Sated Fury, it's only going to provide you with 60 per stack, but it's still pretty good, pretty hooked up, and it does do damage to you. I will say the reason I included this, and I don't think it's just parse cheese, is while I wouldn't run it in group content because you can't be healed by anybody else besides yourself, in solo content you can be healed by your companion, and you can be healed by things like Ring of the Pale Order. So if you are getting heals, you know, it's just a way. It's a high risk, high reward, I guess, or high risk, low reward, medium reward, where you can do extra damage while taking damage. If you instead choose to run the Sated Fury morph, that's the safer morph. Whenever you toggle this ability off to stop taking damage, it will heal you for 30% of the damage caused. In my experience, that basically means it gives you a full health bar in most situations. So just a cool thing you can do here. It increased my parse by about 5k, and I saw Njola did it was about the same for her as well. So about 4 or 5k there is the difference if you want to try this kind of riskier playstyle whenever you're running around solo or what have you. And again, your companion can still heal you while this is active. That's considered, you know, self-heals, I suppose. And then our last skill here is going to be your ultimate on our back bar. So it's often very useful to have an AoE ultimate. Even in single target fights, there's often situations. The other thing is that, you know, if we have a bunch of ultimate going into an important boss fight, we want to be able to cast it. It's kind of wasted if we're casting a lower ultimate costing, you know, ability. So what we'll use here, we actually have 3 choices. I only have 2 listed here, but the first thing up is going to be Veil of Blades. This is a Nightblade class skill that will do the most single target damage, or really the most damage period, but in a relatively small area. So if you're going with full damage, usually what you do is you open with this whenever you're parsing or on a boss fight, and then after that, every other cast after that, you're using incapacitating strikes instead. But it's a nice AoE opener and does a lot of damage, more than our incap would give us. Now, if you're in a fight either in trash pools or there's a lot of ads out, then in using something like the Mage's Guild Meteor is a better way to go. And the reason for that is because each target it hits gives you 12 ultimate back. So if you can hit, you know, 3, 6 targets or whatever, you can get back a ton of ultimate. And that can be really helpful for you in a lot of different contexts to be able to get back ultimate faster. The problem is you have to have Mage's Guild that's really high, and it's kind of annoying. So there's actually a third option here, although I think Veil of Blades is probably the way to go. The third option here is if you're running around solo and you need some heals. I recommend Soul Tether. Soul Tether will still do damage in an AoE, but it'll heal you. You'll drain life from those targets. I find that in most content, this basically makes me unkillable in solo content for the period, even without Ring of the Pale Order, for the period that this lasts. Now, it's only, you know, a handful of, you know, it's only like 8 seconds or something like that. It's fairly, you know, short in its duration. I mean, it's pretty nice. If you have a bunch of ads that come out and you're like, it's like an oh shit moment, you can cast this and keep yourself alive. Maybe you can, you know, use your, you know, siphoning attacks, cast that to get back resources if you were low. It gives you kind of a window to breathe and to, you know, get your bearings, I suppose. All right, so that is it for our skills. So let's talk about how you actually parse with this. So first thing up here is our shade. We can always cast our shade ahead of time out of combat, and it won't aggro. I will note that sometimes, I don't know if it's the instance or the skill, but it will bug, and every time you cast your shade, he'll just charge in and attack. People say that pets don't aggro. Most of the time they don't, but they can. They absolutely can. And I've seen it. It'll just bug, and they'll just charge in, okay? So typically speaking, though, it should be safe to cast your shade beforehand, and then you're going to proc your shadowy disguise so that you get that increase 10% damage. And again, you can cast this before combat has actually started to make sure that buff is up. And then if you are in a situation where you're either on the dummy or a boss is about to spawn in and you know they're about to spawn in, then you want to hit your barb trap, because that will, you can put it down early, it'll arm, takes a couple of seconds, and then it'll do damage. Now, if you're in a situation where you can't get that close to a target to be able to drop Barb Trap, maybe the boss has already spawned or something, then what you would open with is Stampede so that you can close the gap, because most of our abilities are melee and we want to get close to the target, and then you would drop your trap. So it's one or the other. And then usually at that point it's dropping your ultimate. So again, on the dummy, it's going to be the Veil of Blades. In most boss fights, if you have the ultimate, it's going to be Veil of Blades. Then get up all of your dots on your, on your back bar. By that time, you swap to your front bar and you should have a bow proc readied. So you can hit that, and then it's just spamble, 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 bow proc again, refresh your dots as needed. That's basically the rotation. Now, ideally, again, you drink your potion. Every time you do, it's going to give you 20 ultimate back. So you want to be careful. Sometimes, depending on how it lines up, ideally you drink a potion to where you're almost off cooldown, like 10 or 20 seconds before the fight starts. So that way you can go in still having the buffs. And once you've cast your big ultimate, you can immediately drink a potion and get that 20 ultimate back. It'll help you get to in cap faster. And you can do that in content, and you can also do it on the dummy by making sure you drink a potion about 30 or 40 seconds before you actually start the fight. I think it's totally valid because you can do that in content. So make sure that you're not at 70 ultimate though, about ready to cast your in cap, and then you drink a potion. That's not going to do anything for you. You want to cast your in cap and then drink a potion in that situation. This might sound very pedantic, but this is how you get the big numbers on a Nightblade. It's a fairly complicated playstyle, but you can actually do some of the highest single target damage in the game right now on a Nightblade, which is super cool. And honestly, I probably should have led with that to sell the Nightblade more. But again, if you see that, hey, you know what, my Shadowy Disguise is about to run out, and I'm about to have in cap up, well, go ahead and recast it early. Then the in cap comes up again. Hopefully, most of your dots are up. Cast your in cap, Spectral Bow, spamble, spamble, spamble. Spectral Bow again, and then refresh all of your dots once the in cap has gone off. It's fine to let some of your dots tick down, guys, a little bit. The main ones you want to keep up is your Beast Trap, is your back bar Stampede, and then make sure Carve doesn't drop so you don't have to recast it at that 10-second duration. Those are the main things that I would worry about. And again, if you've got only a couple seconds left on them and you're about ready to cast in cap, go ahead and recast them early. It's not going to be the best thing in the world, but it's better than having those buffs run out while you're in that big damage window, right? So if you lose the 10% extra damage from your critical, from your minor force, or if you lose your weapon and spell damage and your buff from your Maelstrom Staff on your back bar, those are things that are going to reduce your damage. At 35%, you stop using your surprise attack and start using Killer's Blade as your spamble. And then when you get to low health, usually under 10%, and you see that the target is going to die before the full duration of your dots runs off, you want to stop recasting all of your dots except for the ones that I mentioned that really keep up your buffs, which is Barb Trap and is Stampede. Okay, you can even let Carve drop off at that point because it's not going to have the full duration, so its full effect isn't that important. Just make sure you can still keep up your Shadowy Disguise, but mostly you're keeping up your buffs and using your spambles at that point. If you have questions, guys, I know there's so much that I could tell you about, running your exact, and many other people could probably tell you about running your exact rotation. Come by the Discord is what I would recommend. We have plenty of people there that can help you, because if you're parsing 60K versus parsing 80, 100, 120, there's totally different things that you need to be concerned about on your parse to really get your numbers up. And if you just come to the Discord and drop in a video if you're on console, drop in a CMX if you're on PC, and we'll be glad to help you and give you specific advice for where you're at to help you out. Okay, so there's plenty of people there, guys. Tons of people in the Discord. It's discord.gg/TWTB. That's where you can find us at, or you can find it here on the channel, or you can find it on nighthorror.com. You can find links there, or nighthorrorgaming.com, either one. Anyways, guys, I think that's it for today. I hope this was helpful. I absolutely love the Nightblade, and I love where it's at right now. It's finally in a great spot. It's in a great spot for healing. It's in a great spot for tanking. It's a great spot for DPS. So loving the Nightblade right now. I hope you guys too. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.